the end of the day, the level of pragmatism that you have in order to try to balance the needs to get things to mass market, and that involves being compatible with pre-existing models of design and architectures. It involves integrations into, various pre-existing IT systems. And it means, scaling to the degree that enough sensible market size could actually use this system all at once. This is a difficult balance to make. Now, you can be idealistic about it. You say, well, we're not going to compromise anywhere. And you can be on the other side, very much pragmatic and say, well, we're going to compromise everywhere, to the degree that you're not even really decentralized anymore. A lot of blockchains have gone through that pragmatic route because, to be honest, the market doesn't punish them. And at the end of the day, many of these people, many on record even, are there to make themselves rich, not to make fulfill the sort of Web3 self-sovereignty, less trust, more truth, building systems that are resilient against entrenched forces in society. Polkadot, I think, takes a much more, on the spectrum, a much more ideological path, without being, I would say at least, zealot about it. I think we're not Puritans either, but we try to ensure that the system that we create is actually decentralized, is actually resilient, and in a maybe somewhat more aggressive wording, is actually unstoppable. And we do this through decentralization, not merely at the protocol level, but also at the governance level. Something that I would say an awful lot of blockchains, possibly all of them, not Polkadot, actually failed to achieve. Polkadot is the world's biggest DAO. It's the world's biggest functional DAO. Its treasury is the biggest DAO treasury. And the economy that it governs is the biggest DAO governed economy. So it's not just another multisig. And I think we see some chaos because of that. But I think it's an important achievement, and especially it will become, I think, especially relevant when the industry matures, when regulations mature, and when regulators take a much more critical eye to the level of decentralization and resilience that each protocol has achieved. What's clear is that a number of other protocols, including some very well-known ones, have been determined as being not decentralized by regulators. We have had dialogues with regulators, and broadly speaking, we have found that regulators have shared our appraisal that Polkadot is indeed a utility, and that it's a decentralized system. And this is a very interesting, this is in my mind, this is one of the most interesting, possibly the most interesting thing about blockchain technology, is that it's a fundamentally new concept in society. And I've done talks on this before, this concept of a-legality. Systems that it's not that they are one way or the other with regards to legality, it's simply that they cannot recognize it. They provide a service, indeed a human-engineered service, yet they don't have any legality has no bearing on the system's operation. And this is a fundamentally new concept, right? We're familiar with like forces of nature, wind, the rain. They also don't care about legality, right? Wind will do damage regardless of whether to property, regardless of whether the local authority decides it wants it or not. But yet, it's a relatively new thing for any system that is human operated. Human operated systems, by and large, rely on a local legal system to operate. They're based on company law, business law, contract law, corporate law, civil law. And blockchains are a very notable example of a human-authored service that does not rely on this, and as such operates outside of this system, operates essentially without reference to it, and it's a very interesting new thing in society. It still remains, I think, a fundamental technology in the development of societies. In my mind, it goes down with the, fire, the wheel, language, printing press, the internet, silicon, and perhaps even AI. AI, I think, is it's a fundamentally biasing force for humanity. Unlike most communication methods, AI intermediates and intentionally corrupts communication between humans. So up until AI, broadly speaking, communication between humans was literally reproduced. So whether this is like writing a letter or mailing it, writing an email, instant messaging, SMS, phone calls, an interview on a TV show, radio, newspapers. This was all literal reproductions of human communications. I type a message out. I speak into the voice piece. I look into the camera. What you see, what you read, what you hear is me, is a direct expression of me as a person. It's not a reimagining of what it is that I want to say. Now, of course, you can argue, well, there are marketing departments, there are promotional departments. Of course, on a large scale, some messaging is massaged according to the audience. But it's a very, it's something that happens in a very, in a way that is very intentional. A human organization gets together and intentionally does it, and the messaging, broadly speaking, is from that human organization or someone that hired them. This is dramatically different with the AI model of intermediated communication. Essentially, the way that we are working towards, and we're doing it pretty quickly as it happens, is we are writing to an AI locally, or an AI that's hosted partially locally and partially in a server farm. And that AI is massaging our message. It's massaging our text. And in the case of deep fakes, it's massaging our appearances into something that is not what it is that we want to say. Now, sometimes we might look at what it said and say, well, I agree with that. It's good enough for me. That's if we're being very careful. A lot of time, and my expectation is that over time, this care that we afford at the moment will be reduced, and we will go along with it. We will go along with what the AI says. And furthermore, as listeners and receivers of communication, we will go along with what the AI purports to represent someone as saying. This is dangerous. Why? Well, because society, broadly speaking, is founded on the communications between individuals. When machines, and in particular corporations that run large AI machines, can act as the intermediaries, can change and arbitrary bias and alter everything that we see and hear that is not literally an in-person, face-to-face meeting, then we're in very dangerous territory, especially as the internet intermediates most of the communications that people do and that society runs on. Essentially, rather than being intermediated by conduits that give exact reproductions, we're being intermediated by corporations that give heavily biased reproductions. And where that ends is essentially a new form of communication, heavily centralized, because it's centralized in these AI wielding conglomerates, and it's not at all clear where it can lead ultimately. But I'd be very surprised if even Orwell was visionary enough to understand the full ramifications of it. It reduces the need for trust. I would say it's not an immediate one-to-one fix, but it is a tool in our toolkit of reducing the degree to which the bias that will necessarily ultimately be introduced by AI wielding corporations, it will reduce the potential and fundamental level of bias that they can introduce. I mean, I think this is probably an absolute necessity if we want to keep society more or less, or if we want to keep the freedoms and sovereignty that we have more or less now. I think unchecked, the level of the world that we'll live in will be substantially beyond I mean, I don't read a lot of sci-fi, so it's very possible that the dystopia that this would introduce has already been imagined and worked through, but if it has, I don't think it's been made into a major motion picture yet. And if we want to keep our level of if we want to keep society functioning more or less as we expect, as we believe it does today, and by that I mean rolling in things like, democracy, self-sovereignty, voting, freedom, stuff that we kind of expect in the West, then AI will need to be either constrained or have technological antidotes that, so to speak, neutralize its venom, the venom of centralization. So Agile Coretime is a way of managing what the various cores of the Polkadot machine, what jobs they're used to do. So up until quite recently, I think it possibly even still on Polkadot anyway, the resources of Polkadot, which we call cores, are used to run parachains, and to register your parachain on a core is something that takes a long time. It's a big auction happens every now and again, and your parachain is registered for upwards of 6 months, most of the time 2 years. So it's not very agile. It's something where you're kind of locked in for a really long time, and that means that the economy itself isn't very agile. It means that as a parachain, you're either kind of in or you're out. Agile Coretime brings a much more responsive market economy to these cores, so that they can be rented out for very short periods, and this gives a huge amount more flexibility to not just the degree to which you have to sort of manage cores, manage your existence on a core in advance, but also to what jobs and sort of economic models the usage of a core could benefit. Developers basically get a much more tangible and responsive model for how they can interact with Polkadot, rather than having to register on a core for like 2 years at a time with a huge deposit potentially, and an auction system that's very difficult to understand where they're gonna fit in. It's a much more sort of pay-as-you-go style of a purchasing scheme. So cores, there's a simple sort of model whereby cores can be purchased essentially at the same price for everybody. Price changes to adapt to market conditions, but essentially there's a fixed price for a month of core time, and then the core time can be split up, giving developers the opportunity to create parachains and indeed general uses for the cores that might only use core time on occasion, or might have peaks of usage and troughs of usage, or might have very particular usage patterns. There can be much more, the economics are much more suitable for this kind of agile usage. Well, CoreJAM is a next logical step after Agile Coretime, and it allows the cores of Polkadot to be used for a much more in a much more general purpose way. So at the moment, cores are basically limited to a very particular model, the model of parachain verification. And with CoreJAM, many different models can be supported, because it's a much more general purpose computation model. Life has a habit of taking you around in circles, and yes, to some degree there is a back to basics with Jam. Indeed, in the Ethereum days, I made a sort of analogy to this big computer in the middle of the world that people could sort of take an elevator down to, and you take their turn to use before going back up. And the idea was that this computer would be quite general purpose. Now, Polkadot, as it stands, provides the relay chain, I should really say, provides a very high performance hardware, so to speak, but it has a sort of fixed application that's running on it, namely this parachain verification service. And with CoreJAM, the idea is to make to open it up so that many different applications can run on this underlying hardware. Furthermore, the idea is to improve on that hardware and really optimize it. So we can deliver something that's as general purpose as that original Ethereum world computer idea, but has an awful lot more performance. And the sort of performance that we're talking about is upwards of 10,000 times what Ethereum would be able to do. Some of the important features that we need to for Polkadot to sort of move to its next level require a more general purpose system, things like accords. It's also important to I think it's important for managing the protocol simplicity. At the moment, it's very difficult to understand how Polkadot works and what it is. And this to some degree limits the take-up of limits expertise within the ecosystem. And by simplifying the core protocol, we're better able to to attract a greater level, greater numbers of experts at the core protocol level. I would say that JAM doesn't take anything away from what Polkadot delivers at present. Really, it's a little more than a reframing, but it's not a major. It's not a pivot. What we're doing is we're ensuring that the resource that Polkadot produces can be used as by as many use cases as possible. We're opening things up, and Polkadot is an open technology. It's about lowering barriers. It's about ensuring that as many people, as many use cases can be used by Polkadot as possible. Now, one thing that I didn't understand as well as I do now when I wrote the Polkadot paper was the level of abstraction that parachains present. And I had imagined that they present a quite fundamental level of abstraction. In reality, we can go a little bit deeper and we get a lot more. I think we get a lot more for going a little bit deeper. And JAM takes us that little bit deeper. It opens up a little bit of ground that it smashes through that concrete layer and lets us get at the fertile soil. And just getting down through that little inch or two of concrete gives us an awful lot of opportunity to plant some crazy shit that can grow, that wouldn't grow if we only had concrete over the top. It's not to say that we don't want concrete over the top in a lot of places, but there are places where we really need to plant some things. The broader mission, the broader goal, right? I mean, at the end of the day, JAM is, I would say JAM is an important technical step for Polkadot. But Polkadot is here as a tool of Web3. And I think JAM helps make Polkadot that more general purpose tool than it is now. But it is still a tool. And there are other tools that you need to build Web3 applications. It's unlikely to be the only tool. And there will likely even be sort of additional ecosystem of tools within Polkadot. Already we're seeing an ecosystem of tools. Many of them are parachains. There are some that are not parachains. In the future, I expect a more diverse set of tools to match the greater diversity of application that JAM allows. Project is JAM, and what I want to do is just make it clear exactly what JAM is and what it does and why we're doing it. It stands for Join Accumulate Machine. It's a new concept of a blockchain. It takes quite a lot of concepts that have been